The stagecoach lurched to a halt in front of a weathered saloon, dust swirling around wooden wheels that had carried Josephine Reed across more miles than she cared to count. And as she peered through the cracked window at the desolate street, lined with buildings that looked nothing like the prosperous town her cousin had described in letters, her stomach dropped with the terrible realization that something had gone very, very wrong. "Red Cloud, Nebraska," the driver called out, his voice rough as sandpaper. "End of the line, miss." Josephine gathered her carpetbag and stepped down onto the packed earth, her traveling dress covered in a fine layer of prairie dust. The September sun beat down mercilessly on the main street of what could barely be called a town. There were perhaps a dozen buildings, most in various states of disrepair, and not a single one matched her cousin Margaret's descriptions of the bustling settlement where she had supposedly established a successful dress shop. "Excuse me," Josephine called to the driver as he began unhitching the horses. "Are you certain this is Red Cloud? I was meant to meet my cousin Margaret Reed here." The driver spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "This is Red Cloud, all right. Been driving this route for 3 years. Never heard of any Margaret Reed, though." A cold knot formed in Josephine's chest. She had sold everything she owned in Philadelphia, used every last dollar to purchase the stagecoach ticket west, all based on her cousin's enthusiastic letters about opportunity and prosperity. Now she stood in what appeared to be little more than a collection of ramshackle buildings in the middle of endless prairie, with exactly 17 cents in her purse. "Perhaps someone inside would know," she said, more to herself than the driver, and headed toward the saloon. The interior was dim and smelled of old whiskey and tobacco smoke. 3 men sat at a corner table playing cards, and a weary-looking bartender polished glasses behind a scarred wooden counter. All conversation stopped when she entered. "I am looking for Margaret Reed," Josephine said, trying to keep her voice steady. "She wrote that she owned a dress shop here." The bartender scratched his graying beard. "No dress shop in Red Cloud, miss. Never has been far as I know. But that cannot be. I have her letters." She specifically mentioned this town. One of the card players, a grizzled man with more whiskey in him than sense, laughed. "Sounds like someone played you for a fool, girl. Happens all the time. People write fancy stories about the West, get folks to come out with their life savings." Josephine felt the blood drain from her face. Could Margaret have lied? Or worse, could someone have been impersonating her cousin? She had not seen Margaret in over 10 years, not since they were both children. "There is a Red Cloud in Kansas," the bartender offered, not unkindly. "Maybe you got the state wrong," the letters said Nebraska quite clearly. Josephine's hands trembled as she clutched her bag. "Is there a sheriff? Someone who might help me sort this out? Sheriff died last winter. Pneumonia. Town has not gotten around to replacing him yet." The bartender set down his glass. "Look, miss, I do not mean to be harsh, but Red Cloud is not a place for a woman alone. We are barely hanging on ourselves. Drought has been bad, crops have failed, and most folks with sense have already moved on." Josephine looked around the dim saloon, reality crashing down on her. She had no money for a return ticket, no money for food or lodging, no prospects whatsoever. "I need work," she heard herself say. "Anything. I can cook, clean, so I am educated. I can read and write and do figures." The bartender's expression softened with pity. "There is nothing here, miss. Maybe in Lincoln or Omaha, but here, we can barely feed ourselves." The door opened behind her, flooding the room with afternoon sunlight. Josephine turned to see a man silhouetted in the doorway, tall and broad-shouldered, hat pulled low over his face. "Ned, you got any of that coffee left?" The voice was deep, with a warm quality that somehow cut through Josephine's rising panic. "For you, Nathan, always." The bartender's demeanor changed, becoming almost cheerful. "Come on in. We got ourselves a situation here you might find interesting." The man stepped inside, and Josephine got her first clear look at him. He was perhaps 25 or 26, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar, and eyes the color of prairie sky before a storm. His face was tanned and weathered from outdoor work, with strong features that might have been carved from the same rock as the bluffs she had seen from the stagecoach window. He wore dusty range clothes and moved with the easy confidence of someone completely comfortable in his own skin. "What kind of situation?" he asked, those blue-gray eyes landing on Josephine with an intensity that made her breath catch. "This young lady got herself delivered to the wrong town," the bartender explained. "Or maybe the right town with the wrong expectations. Either way, she is stranded with no money and no prospects." Josephine felt her cheeks burn. "I can speak for myself, thank you, and I am not looking for charity. I simply need honest work." The cowboy looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable passing across his face. "You can sew, you said?" "Yes. I worked in a textile factory in Philadelphia for 3 years. Before that, my mother taught me fine needlework." "Can you cook?" "I can. Clean, of course." He nodded slowly, as if making a decision. "My ranch is about 8 miles north of here." "It is not much, but I have been needing help with the house. My mother passed 2 years ago, and I have let things go to pieces. I can offer room and board plus 25 cents a day. It is not much, but it is honest work." The bartender raised his eyebrows. "You sure about that, Nathan?" "Town might talk." "Town is 3 old men and a bartender, Ned. I think we will survive the scandal." Nathan turned back to Josephine. "It is a legitimate offer, Miss Reed, Josephine Reed." She studied his face, looking for any sign of improper intentions, but saw only straightforward honesty. "You are certain this is appropriate? I do not wish to cause problems. You will have your own room. I sleep in the barn most nights anyway. Easier when the calves are birthing. You would be helping me out considerably, Miss Reed. The house is in sorry shape." It was not what she had planned. Not even close. But it was better than sleeping on the street or trying to walk to the next town with no money. And there was something about this cowboy, this Nathan, that made her feel safer than she had since stepping off the stagecoach. "All right," she said. "I accept your offer." "Good." He extended his hand. "Nathan Wright, welcome to Nebraska." His grip was warm and calloused when she shook his hand, and Josephine felt an unexpected flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with her dire circumstances. The ride to Nathan Wright's ranch passed in relative silence, with Josephine seated beside him on the wagon bench as 2 steady draft horses pulled them north across the open prairie. The land stretched endlessly in all directions, golden grass rippling like an ocean under the late afternoon sun. She had never seen so much sky, so much space. Philadelphia had been all narrow streets and crowded buildings, the horizon always interrupted by brick and mortar. "It is your first time out west," Nathan said. It was not a question. "Yes, is it that obvious?" "You keep looking around like you have never seen grass before." There was no mockery in his tone, just observation. "I have seen grass, just not so much of it all at once." She adjusted her bonnet against the sun. "Are there always this few trees?" "Along the rivers and creeks you will find cottonwoods and willows. But out here on the prairie, yes, it is mostly grass. Takes some getting used to." "How long have you been here?" "All my life. My parents came out in 1859 before I was born. My father wanted land of his own, and the Homestead Act made that possible. They built the ranch from nothing." His jaw tightened slightly. "My father died when I was 16, kicked in the head by a horse. My mother held on for another 7 years before her heart gave out." "I am sorry." He shrugged. It is the way of things. This land takes a lot from people, but it gives back too if you are willing to work for it. They crested a small rise, and Josephine saw the ranch spread out below them. A weathered house sat beside a barn and several outbuildings, surrounded by corrals and fenced pastures. Cattle dotted the landscape, red and brown shapes moving slowly through the grass. A creek wound past the buildings, marked by a line of trees. "This is all yours?" she asked, impressed despite herself. Quarter section. 160 acres. Not the biggest spread, but it is mine. Pride colored his voice. "I run about 50 head of cattle, sell the calves each fall. It is enough to make a living if you are careful." As they drew closer, Josephine could see what he meant about the house needing help. The porch sagged on one side, several shutters hung askew, and the whole structure needed paint. But the bones were good, she could see that. It was a solid building, just neglected. Nathan pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house and helped her down. His hands on her waist were gentle but firm, and again she felt that strange flutter. "Let me show you inside," he said, grabbing her carpet bag from the wagon bed. The interior confirmed her assessment. Good bones, bad maintenance. The main room served as kitchen and living area, with a large fireplace along one wall. Dust covered every surface, dirty dishes were piled in the dry sink, and cobwebs draped the corners. A door led to what appeared to be a bedroom, and a ladder climbed to a loft space above. "The bedroom was my parents'," Nathan explained. "That will be yours. I have been sleeping in the loft, but like I said, I am usually in the barn anyway." Josephine set down her bag and looked around. It was overwhelming, but she had handled worse. The factory where she worked had been far dirtier than this. "I will need water," she said. "And soap if you have any. Rags for cleaning. Is there a garden?" Creek runs year-round about 50 yards behind the house. "I have got soap somewhere, and my mother's cleaning supplies should be in the cupboard. There used to be a garden, but it has gone to weeds." He looked embarrassed. "I know it is bad, I just never seem to find the time." "It is fine. I have dealt with worse." She rolled up her sleeves. "Is there food in the house?" "Some. Mostly beans and bacon, coffee. I usually eat pretty simple." "Well, that will change. A man cannot work on just beans and bacon." She surveyed the kitchen with a critical eye. "That stove will need to be cleaned before I can cook anything proper. Is there wood?" "Plenty. I will bring some in." He hesitated. "Miss Reed, I want you to know you will be safe here. I am not, that is, I do not expect anything improper." She met his eyes directly. "I believe you, Mr. Wright. You do not seem the type. Nathan, just Nathan." "Then you should call me Josephine." "All right, Josephine." The way he said her name, soft and careful, made her stomach flip. "I will let you get settled. I need to check on the stock before dark, but I will bring in wood and water first." True to his word, he hauled in 2 buckets of water and an armload of wood, then disappeared toward the barn. Josephine stood in the middle of the dusty house and took a deep breath. This was not what she had planned. This was nothing like what she had imagined when she boarded that stagecoach in Philadelphia. But she was here now, and she would make the best of it. She found soap and rags in the cupboard, just as Nathan had said, along with a few other supplies. Rolling up her sleeves further, she began with the stove, scraping away months of accumulated grease and ash. It was hard work, and by the time she finished, her hands were black and her dress was filthy, but the stove was clean. Next came the dishes, washing them in the creek since the indoor pump seemed to be broken. The September evening was pleasant, and she found herself enjoying the sound of running water and the rustle of cottonwood leaves overhead. Crickets were beginning to chirp in the grass. By the time full dark fell, she had made significant progress. The kitchen was still far from perfect, but it was functional. She found beans and bacon as promised, along with flour, salt, and a few other staples. Not much to work with, but enough for a decent meal. Nathan came in just as she was setting food on the table. She had found 2 plates, 2 cups, and 2 sets of utensils in the cupboard after washing them. "You cleaned the stove," he said, surprise evident in his voice. "I did. Sit down and eat before it gets cold." He washed his hands in the basin she had set out, then sat at the table. She had made beans with bacon, but she had found an onion in the root cellar and some dried herbs hanging forgotten in a corner. It was simple food, but it was properly seasoned and cooked. Nathan took a bite and his eyes widened. "This is good. It is just beans, but they taste like something. I usually just boil everything until it is soft." He took another bite. "You can really cook." "I learned from my mother. She believed good food was important even when money was tight." Josephine sat across from him, suddenly aware of how tired she was. "Tell me about the ranch. What needs to be done?" They talked through dinner, and Nathan explained the rhythms of ranch life. The cattle mostly took care of themselves, grazing on the open range, but they needed checking daily. He grew hay for winter feed, which meant cutting and baling in summer. There were fences to maintain, equipment to repair, 100 small tasks that filled every day. "I have been thinking about expanding," he admitted. "Getting more cattle, maybe buying the adjacent quarter section if it comes available. But that requires money, and money requires time, and there are only so many hours in a day. You need help." "I do. I have been managing alone since my mother died, but it is catching up with me. That is why I offered you the job so quickly. You seemed capable, and I need capable." He paused. "Though I will admit I might have been hasty. You are probably used to city life, proper society. This is rough living out here." "I worked 12 hours a day in a textile factory breathing lint and chemical fumes," Josephine said firmly. "Before that, my father drank away every penny we had while my mother and I tried to keep us fed. Do not assume I am some delicate city flower, Nathan. I have worked hard all my life." He looked at her with new respect. "I apologize. I should not have assumed." "Apology accepted. Now, tomorrow I will need to do laundry and that pump needs fixing. Can you manage that?" "Yes, madam." A smile tugged at his lips. "You sound like my mother. She ran this place like a general running an army. Smart woman." Josephine stood and began clearing the dishes. "You should get some sleep. I imagine you rise early, before dawn, but you do not need to get up with me. Take the time to rest." "I will rise when you rise." There is too much work to waste daylight. Nathan stood as well, and in the small kitchen they were suddenly very close. He smelled like leather and hay and clean sweat, not unpleasant at all. Josephine found herself noticing the way his shirt pulled across his shoulders, the strong column of his throat. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for taking a chance on this. I know it was not what you planned." "No," she agreed, "but perhaps it will turn out better than what I planned." Their eyes met and held for a moment too long. Then Nathan cleared his throat and stepped back. "I will see you in the morning, Josephine." "Good night, Nathan." She watched him climb the ladder to the loft, then turned to finish the dishes. Her hands moved automatically while her mind churned. This cowboy, this Nathan Wright, was nothing like the men she had known in Philadelphia. He was direct and honest, hardworking and kind. And handsome, though she tried not to dwell on that. She was here to work, to earn money, to figure out what had happened with her cousin and decide what to do next. Romance was the last thing she needed. But as she dried the last plate and looked around the kitchen she had begun to reclaim from neglect, Josephine could not quite shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, the stagecoach had brought her to exactly the right place after all. The first week passed in a blur of hard work. Josephine rose before dawn with Nathan. made coffee and breakfast while he did the morning chores, then attacked the house with determination. She scrubbed floors until her knees ached, washed windows until they shone, beat the dust from every curtain and rug. Nathan fixed the pump as promised, then repaired the sagging porch and straightened the shutters. They fell into an easy rhythm. Nathan would work outside during the day while Josephine tackled the indoor spaces. At noon, she would ring the bell he had given her, and he would come in for lunch. They would eat together, talking about the work accomplished and what needed doing next, then back to work until dinner. The evenings were Josephine's favorite time. After dinner, they would sit on the newly repaired porch and watch the sun set over the prairie. Nathan would tell her about the land, teaching her to read the weather in the sky and the behavior of the animals. She would tell him about Philadelphia, about her life before this, though she kept the hardest parts vague. "You never talk about your father," Nathan observed one evening about 10 days after her arrival. Josephine was quiet for a moment, watching the sky turn pink and gold. "He was not a good man. He drank, and when he drank he was cruel. He died when I was 15, and I cannot say I mourned him." "I am sorry. Do not be. My mother and I were better off without him. She passed 3 years later from consumption. That loss I felt deeply." She picked at a thread on her skirt. "I went to work in the factory after she died. It was the only job I could find that paid enough to live on." "You never married. Forgive me if that is too personal." "No, I never married. There was a man once, a foreman at the factory. He seemed kind and I was lonely. But he only wanted one thing, and when I refused him, he made my life miserable until I had to quit." She looked at Nathan. "That is why I came west, really. I had been out of work for 2 months when I received Margaret's letters. They seemed like a miracle, a chance to start over. Now I know they were probably a lie, but still they brought me here." "Maybe not a lie," Nathan said thoughtfully. "Maybe just directed to the wrong person. You said you had not seen your cousin in years. Not since we were children. So someone could have been impersonating her, sending letters to people back east, promising them opportunities that did not exist. Could be they pocketed money for tickets or asked people to bring valuables. It is an old confidence trick." Josephine felt cold despite the warm evening. "You mean I was being swindled, possibly? Or maybe your cousin did write those letters from a different red cloud and you just ended up in the wrong one. Either way, the result is the same. You are here." "Yes," she said softly, "I am here." "Is that so terrible?" She looked at him, at his honest face and kind eyes, at the prairie spreading endlessly behind him. "No, it is not terrible at all." The air between them felt suddenly charged, heavy with unspoken words. Nathan leaned slightly closer, and Josephine's heart began to race. But then a coyote howled in the distance, breaking the spell, and Nathan stood abruptly. "I should check on the stock one more time before bed," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "All right. I will see you in the morning." He paused at the steps. "Josephine." "Yes, I am glad you are here. Even if it was not what you planned." Before she could respond, he strode off toward the barn, leaving her alone with the crickets and the dying light and a heart that was beating far too fast. By the end of the 2nd week, the house had been transformed. Every room was clean, the windows sparkled, and Josephine had even managed to resurrect the garden, planting late-season vegetables that might still produce before the first frost. She had mended all of Nathan's clothes, patched the holes in his socks, and organized the chaos of the barn into something resembling order. Nathan seemed different too. He smiled more, laughed easier. He had started shaving regularly again and taking more care with his appearance. Josephine tried not to read too much into it, but she could not help noticing the way his eyes followed her when he thought she was not looking. She caught herself doing the same thing. Watching the way he moved, all lean strength and unconscious grace. Noticing how his hair curled when it was damp with sweat, how his hands were strong but gentle with the animals. She had never been much interested in men before, too focused on survival to think about romance. But Nathan Wright was making her reconsider. On a Saturday afternoon, Nathan suggested they ride into town for supplies. Josephine had not been back to Red Cloud since the day she arrived, and she was surprised to find she was almost nervous about it. "What if people think poorly of our arrangement?" she asked as they loaded into the wagon. "Let them think what they want. We know the truth." Nathan clicked to the horses. "Besides, I told you there is hardly anyone left to have opinions." He was right. Red Cloud seemed even more desolate than she remembered. They stopped at the general store, a ramshackle building with a limited selection of goods. The proprietor, an elderly man named Henry, greeted Nathan warmly. "Good to see you, Nathan, and this must be the young lady I heard about." His eyes were curious but not unkind. "Henry, this is Josephine Reed. She is keeping house for me." "Pleased to meet you, miss." Henry's gaze was sharp. "Heard you got delivered to the wrong town." "Something like that," Josephine said, "but it seems to have worked out." They purchased flour, sugar, coffee, and various other supplies. Josephine noticed Nathan buying things he probably would not have bought for himself. Real butter, eggs, a small bottle of vanilla extract. "You do not have to buy extra on my account," she said quietly. "A man gets tired of plain food. Besides, you are earning your keep 10 times over." Back outside, they loaded the supplies into the wagon. The bartender, Ned, came out of the saloon and waved them over. "Got some mail for you, Nathan. Came in on Wednesday's stage." Nathan took the letters, shuffling through them. His expression darkened as he read one. "Bad news?" Josephine asked. "Letter from the bank in Lincoln. They are raising the interest rate on my loan." He folded the letter and shoved it in his pocket. "I needed that like a hole in the head." "You have a loan. Bought new breeding stock last year. Took out a loan to do it. I have been paying it down, but if they raise the rate, it will take longer." He rubbed his face. "It will be fine. I just need to sell more calves this fall." Josephine touched his arm. "If there is anything I can do to help." He looked at her hand on his arm, then up at her face. "You are already helping. More than you know." They rode back to the ranch in companionable silence, but Josephine could not stop thinking about the worry she had seen in Nathan's eyes. He had given her a job when she desperately needed one, offered her safety and security. She wanted to help him in return. That evening, after dinner, she broached a subject she had been considering. "Nathan, you said you wanted to expand the ranch. What is stopping you besides money?" He leaned back in his chair. "Time, mostly. I can only do so much alone. If I had help, real help with the cattle work, I could run more head. But hiring a hand costs money I do not have." "What if you had help that did not cost money?" "What do you mean? Teach me." "Teach me to ride, to work cattle, to do the things you do. I am strong, I am not afraid of hard work, and I am already here." Nathan stared at her. "Josephine, that is ranch work. It is hard, dirty, sometimes dangerous. So is factory work. At least on a ranch I would be outside in fresh air instead of breathing lint." She leaned forward. "I mean it, Nathan. I want to help, really help, not just with the house." "You do not need to do that. I hired you to keep house, and you have done that admirably. But what if I want to do more? What if I want to learn something new?" She met his eyes. "Unless you think I am not capable." "That is not what I think at all." He ran a hand through his hair. "All right, if you are sure, I will teach you. We will start tomorrow with riding lessons." Josephine smiled. "Thank you." "Do not thank me yet. You might change your mind once you have been thrown a few times." But she did not change her mind. The next morning, Nathan brought out a gentle mare named Daisy and began teaching Josephine to ride. It was harder than it looked, and she did indeed get thrown twice. But she got back on each time, determined to master this skill. Over the following weeks, Nathan taught her everything. How to saddle and bridle a horse, how to ride at different gaits, how to read cattle and move them where you wanted them to go. She learned to throw a rope, though her loops were laughably bad at first. She learned to check the fences, to recognize signs of illness in the stock, to anticipate weather changes. Her hands, already roughened from housework, developed new calluses. Her muscles, sore at first, grew stronger. She took to wearing split skirts that Nathan found in his mother's old trunk, more practical for riding than regular dresses. And through it all, she and Nathan grew closer. They worked side by side every day, ate every meal together, spent every evening talking on the porch. She learned that he loved the land with a fierce passion, that he dreamed of building something lasting, a legacy to pass on someday. He was patient and funny and surprisingly well-read, his mother having insisted on education despite the isolation. She told him things she had never told anyone. About her father's rages, her mother's quiet strength, her own fears and hopes. He listened without judgment, offering comfort when she needed it and silence when that was better. October arrived with crisp mornings and golden afternoons. The cottonwoods along the creek turned yellow, and the prairie grass faded to tan. Nathan said it was time to gather the calves for sale, and for the first time, Josephine would help with the roundup. They rose in the dark and ate a quick breakfast, then rode out as the sky was just beginning to lighten. The morning air was cold enough to show their breath, and frost sparkled on the grass. Josephine felt alive in a way she never had before, riding across the open prairie with the sunrise spreading across the sky. They found the cattle scattered across several draws and began pushing them together. It was hot work despite the cool morning, and Josephine quickly learned that cows did not always want to go where you wanted them to. But she stuck with it, following Nathan's directions, moving calves toward the main herd. By midday they had gathered most of them and were driving them back toward the ranch corrals. Josephine was dusty, sweaty, and exhausted, but also exhilarated. She had done it. She had helped Nathan work cattle like a real ranch hand. "You did well," Nathan said as they hazed the last few calves into the corral. "Really well. I could not have done this alone." "We make a good team," Josephine said, and then blushed at her own forwardness. Nathan looked at her for a long moment, something intense and unguarded in his expression. "Yes, we do." That night they were both too tired to do more than eat a simple dinner and collapse into bed. But lying in the darkness of her room, Josephine could not sleep. Her body ached in new ways, but that was not what kept her awake. It was the memory of Nathan's eyes when he said they made a good team. The way her heart had jumped at those simple words, she was falling in love with him. The realization was both terrifying and inevitable. How had this happened? She had been here less than 2 months. She barely knew him. But that was not true, she realized. She knew him better than she had known anyone. She knew how he took his coffee, what made him laugh, what worried him at night. She knew the way he hummed tunelessly when he worked, how he was kind to his animals, how he never said a cruel word even when he was frustrated. She knew he was honest and hardworking and good, truly good in a way her father had never been. And she hoped, that maybe he felt the same way about her. The calves sold well at the market in North Platte, bringing enough money to pay down Nathan's loan and leave a little extra. He bought Josephine a new dress, a beautiful deep blue that matched her eyes despite her protests that she did not need it. "You have earned it 10 times over," he insisted. "Besides, Christmas is coming. Consider it an early present." They celebrated that night with a special dinner. Josephine made fried chicken and biscuits. using some of the butter and eggs Nathan had bought as a treat. They even had apple pie for dessert, the apples purchased from a farmer on the way back from North Platte. "This is the best meal I have had in years," Nathan said, finishing his second piece of pie. "Maybe ever. You are easy to please." But Josephine was smiling, pleased by his appreciation. "I mean it. Everything is better since you came. The house, the food, the ranch. You." He set down his fork and looked at her directly. "I do not know what I did to deserve having you land here, Josephine, but I am grateful for it every day." Her heart was pounding. "I am grateful too. You saved me when I had nowhere else to turn." "Is that the only reason?" The question hung between them. Josephine took a breath, gathering her courage. "No, that is not the only reason." Nathan stood and came around the table. He held out his hand and she took it, letting him pull her to her feet. They were close, so close she could see the darker ring around his irises, the way his pulse beat in his throat. "I have been trying not to do this," he said quietly. "You work for me. It would not be right to take advantage. You could never take advantage of me. I am here because I choose to be." "Are you sure?" "Because once I start, I do not think I will be able to stop." In answer, Josephine rose on her toes and kissed him. It was soft at first, tentative, both of them testing new territory. But then Nathan's arms came around her, pulling her close, and the kiss deepened into something that made her head spin and her knees weak. He kissed like he did everything else, with complete focus and surprising gentleness, and Josephine felt like she was melting into him. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Nathan rested his forehead against hers. "I am in love with you," he said simply. "I think I have been since you stepped off that stagecoach looking lost and determined all at once. I know it is fast, I know it is probably crazy, but it is the truth." Joy bloomed in Josephine's chest, so intense it was almost painful. "I love you too. I did not mean to, I did not plan on it, but I do." He kissed her again, longer this time, deeper, until they were both trembling. When he pulled back, his eyes were dark with desire but also something more tender. "Marry me," he said. "I know I should do this proper, get down on one knee and make a speech, but I am just a cowboy, Josephine, and I do not have fancy words. I just know I want you here always, not as my housekeeper but as my wife. I want to build this ranch with you, build a life with you. I want to watch the sun rise from our porch every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. So marry me, please." Tears were streaming down Josephine's face, but she was smiling. "Yes, yes, I will marry you." Nathan whooped and picked her up, spinning her around the kitchen while she laughed. When he set her down, they were both grinning like fools. "We can get married in Red Cloud," he said. "Old Henry can perform the ceremony. He is a notary, so it will be legal. We can do it next Saturday if you want." "That's soon. I have waited long enough. I do not want to wait any more." He cupped her face in his hands. "Unless you want a big wedding. We could go to Lincoln, have something fancier." "No, Red Cloud is perfect. You are perfect." She kissed him again, softer this time. "I cannot believe this is happening." "Believe it. You are stuck with me now, Josephine Reed, or you will be once you are Josephine Wright." She tested the name silently. Josephine Wright. It sounded right, like it was always meant to be. They stayed up late talking, making plans for their future. Nathan wanted to build onto the house, add more rooms for the children they both wanted. Josephine suggested expanding the garden, maybe getting chickens and a milk cow. They would need hired help eventually, but for now they would manage together, partners in every sense of the word. "You ever wonder?" Josephine asked as they sat on the porch in the moonlight. "What would have happened if the stagecoach had brought me to the right town?" Nathan wrapped his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "I used to think there were right and wrong ways for things to happen, but now I think maybe everything happens exactly as it is meant to." The stagecoach brought you here to me, and that feels more right than anything I have ever known. When I realized I was in the wrong town, I was terrified. I thought my life was over. And now, she leaned into him, feeling safe and loved and home. Now I think maybe it was just beginning. They married the following Saturday in a simple ceremony at the general store. Henry performed the service, with Ned and the 3 old men from the saloon as witnesses. Josephine wore her new blue dress, and Nathan wore his best shirt and clean trousers. They exchanged simple gold bands that had belonged to Nathan's parents, and when Henry pronounced them husband and wife, Nathan kissed her with such tenderness that Josephine felt tears prick her eyes. They celebrated with a small party at the saloon. Ned provided whiskey, and Josephine had made a cake. It was not fancy, but it was joyful, and for a few hours the little dying town of Red Cloud felt alive again. That night, back at the ranch, Nathan carried Josephine over the threshold of the house that was now truly theirs. He set her down gently in the bedroom, and they came together with a mix of passion and tenderness that left them both breathless and amazed. Afterward, lying in Nathan's arms with moonlight streaming through the window, Josephine felt complete in a way she never had before. She had thought she was coming west to find her cousin to start a dress shop to make a modest living. Instead, she had found a home, a partnership, a love she had not even known to hope for. "What are you thinking?" Nathan asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "That I am the luckiest woman alive. I am the lucky one. I was so lonely before you came, Josephine. I did not even realize how lonely until suddenly I was not anymore." She turned to face him, studying his features in the dim light. "Promise me something. Anything. Promise me we will always be this honest with each other, that we will always be partners, not just in work but in everything. I promise. We are in this together, you and me, for the rest of our lives." He kissed her forehead. "Get some sleep, Mrs. Wright. We have a ranch to run in the morning." She smiled against his chest. Mrs. Wright. She would never get tired of hearing that. Winter settled over the prairie with cold winds and occasional snow. Josephine and Nathan worked together to prepare the ranch for the harsh season, storing hay for the cattle, stocking supplies, and winterizing the buildings. They were snowed in for nearly a week in January, but Josephine did not mind. It gave them time together, reading by the fire, talking for hours, making love in the warmth of their bed while the wind howled outside. In February, Josephine realized she was pregnant. She told Nathan over breakfast on a sunny morning, watching his face transform from surprise to pure joy. "Are you sure?" he asked, coming around the table to kneel beside her chair. "As sure as I can be. I have missed my courses twice now, and I have been feeling sick in the mornings." He laid his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "A baby. We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" "Happy." He laughed. "Josephine, I am beyond happy. I am terrified and thrilled and already worrying about things that will not matter for months. But mostly I am grateful. Grateful for you, for this, for everything." Spring brought new calves and the hard work of branding and vaccinating. Josephine, now showing clearly, still helped with the lighter work despite Nathan's protests. She refused to be treated like an invalid, and eventually he learned to accept her stubborn independence. In May, when the prairie was green and wildflowers bloomed in every color imaginable, Nathan finished building an addition onto the house. 2 new rooms, one for the baby and one for future children. He painted them white and built furniture from cottonwood he cut by the creek. "It is perfect," Josephine said, standing in the new nursery with tears in her eyes. "You built this all for us. I would build you a palace if I could, but this will have to do. This is better than any palace." Summer was long and hot. Josephine spent the days preserving food for winter. her belly growing larger as the garden produced beans and tomatoes and squash. Nathan hired a young man named Tom to help with the heavy work, and having the extra hand allowed Nathan to spend more time with Josephine as her due date approached. On a September evening, exactly 1 year after she had arrived in Red Cloud, Josephine went into labor. Nathan rode frantically to town to fetch the closest thing to a doctor the area had, a retired Army medic named Jonas. The labor was long and hard, lasting through the night and into the next day. Nathan held Josephine's hand through all of it, wiping her face with cool cloths and telling her she was doing great, that she was strong, that he loved her. Finally, in the late afternoon, their son was born. He came into the world red-faced and howling, a healthy 7 pounds. Josephine cried when they placed him in her arms, overwhelmed by love for this tiny person she and Nathan had created. "He is perfect," Nathan whispered, his own eyes wet. "You are both perfect." They named him Thomas Reed Wright after Nathan's father and Josephine's maiden name. Little Tommy, as they immediately began calling him, had his mother's dark hair and his father's blue-gray eyes. He was everything they had hoped for. The first months of parenthood were exhausting. Tommy was a good baby, but he still woke multiple times a night to nurse. Josephine was tired constantly, but she had never been happier. Nathan was a devoted father, walking the floor with Tommy when he was fussy, changing diapers without complaint, and looking at his son with an expression of wonder that never seemed to fade. "I never imagined this," he told Josephine one night as they watched Tommy sleep in his cradle. "A year ago I was alone, barely keeping this place running. Now I have you and him, and it feels like my life finally makes sense." "I know what you mean. When I stepped off that stagecoach in the wrong town, I thought I had lost everything. I could never have imagined I would find this instead." Nathan wrapped his arm around her. "The wrong town brought you to exactly the right place. Or maybe this was the right town all along." The years passed in a rhythm of hard work and deep contentment. Tommy grew into a sturdy toddler with his father's adventurous spirit and his mother's determination. When he was 2, Josephine became pregnant again, this time with twins. She gave birth in early spring to a daughter they named Emily, and another son they named Samuel. With 3 young children, life on the ranch was chaotic. But Nathan and Josephine managed it together, dividing responsibilities and supporting each other through the hard moments. Tom, the hired hand, became like family, living in a small cabin Nathan built near the barn and eating meals with them most evenings. The ranch prospered. Nathan expanded the herd, bought additional land, and built a reputation for quality cattle. Josephine maintained the house and garden, raised the children, and still helped with ranch work when she could. They made decisions together, partners in every sense. Red Cloud itself began to slowly recover. A few new families moved in, attracted by cheap land and the possibility of a fresh start. A proper school opened when Tommy was 5, and Josephine served on the board. The town would never be large, but it was theirs, and they took pride in helping it survive. When Tommy was 7, Emily and Samuel 5, Josephine became pregnant one more time. She was 31 now, a bit older than she had been with the other children, and the pregnancy was harder. But in the late fall, she gave birth to a healthy daughter they named Margaret, after the cousin whose letters, false or misdirected as they had been, had brought Josephine west. Nathan held little Maggie and looked at Josephine with tears in his eyes. "4 children. I am the richest man alive." "We are rich," Josephine corrected, "in all the ways that matter." The children grew like prairie grass, strong and wild and free. Tommy learned to ride almost before he could walk, already showing his father's natural affinity for animals and the land. Emily was quiet and thoughtful, spending hours with her mother learning to sew and cook and garden. Samuel was the mischief maker, always getting into something, but with a sweet nature that made it impossible to stay angry with him. And Maggie, the baby, was pure sunshine, laughing at everything and charming everyone she met. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Nathan took Josephine back to the spot where he had first brought her from Red Cloud. They stood looking down at the ranch spread below them, much larger now than it had been. The house had been expanded again, the barn rebuilt, new corrals and outbuildings added. Cattle dotted the landscape in every direction. "You remember what I said to you that first day?" Nathan asked. "When you said the stagecoach had brought you to the wrong town, you said maybe it was exactly where I belonged. Did you believe me then?" Josephine thought back to that day, to her fear and uncertainty, to the way Nathan's simple words had given her the first spark of hope. "I wanted to believe you, but I was too scared to hope. And now—" She looked at him, at the face she knew better than her own, at the man who had given her everything she had never dared to dream of. "Now I know you were right. This is exactly where I belong. Where I always belonged. I just had to travel across the country to find it." Nathan pulled her close, kissing her with the same passion and tenderness he had shown on their wedding night. "I love you, Josephine Wright. I have loved you from the moment you stepped off that stagecoach, all lost and determined, and I will love you until my last breath. I love you too. Always." They stood there as the sun set over the prairie, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. Below them, smoke rose from the chimney of their house, where their children were probably driving poor Tom crazy waiting for their parents to return. The cattle were settling in for the night, and somewhere a coyote began its evening song. It was not the life Josephine had planned, but it was better than anything she could have imagined. She had come west looking for one thing and found something far more precious. She had found home. She had found love. She had found herself. And it had all started because a stagecoach brought her to the wrong town, and a cowboy had been wise enough to see that maybe, just maybe, it was exactly where she belonged. The years continued to unfold with a gentle rhythm punctuated by the changing seasons and the growing children. Tommy turned out to be a natural horseman, working alongside his father from the time he was 10 years old. By the time he was 14, he could rope and brand as well as any grown man, and Nathan relied on him heavily during the busy seasons. Emily developed a passion for teaching and began helping at the Red Cloud schoolhouse when she was just 12. She was patient and kind with the younger children, and the schoolteacher, Mrs. Henderson, often remarked that Emily would make a fine teacher herself one day. But Emily also had her mother's practical skills, and she could run the household as efficiently as Josephine when needed. Samuel discovered a talent for working with wood. He spent hours in the workshop Nathan had built, carving and building, creating everything from simple toys to intricate furniture. By the time he was 13, he was taking commissions from neighbors, his work in demand for its quality and artistry. And Maggie, the baby of the family, was the heart of them all. She had inherited her father's love of the land and her mother's fierce determination. At 8 years old, she could already ride better than most adults, and had declared her intention to be a rancher like her papa. Josephine watched her children grow with a mixture of pride and bittersweet awareness that they would not stay children forever. Tommy was already 16, nearly a man, and she knew it would not be long before he started thinking about his own future, perhaps his own land. "You ever regret it?" Nathan asked one evening as they sat on their porch, a nightly ritual they had maintained for nearly 15 years. "Not having the life you might have had in Philadelphia. The city opportunities, the society." Josephine took his calloused hand in hers. Never, not once. Nathan, I was surviving in Philadelphia, not living. Here I have lived, I have loved and been loved. I have built something lasting. I have raised children who will make their own marks on this world. How could I possibly regret that? I just want you to be happy. I am happy. Happier than I ever imagined possible. She squeezed his hand. Are you happy? Beyond measure. He brought her hand to his lips and kissed it. You gave me everything, Josephine. A family, a full life, a reason to build for the future instead of just getting by day to day. The ranch had indeed become something impressive. Nathan now ran 200 head of cattle across 400 acres. He employed 3 permanent hands plus seasonal help during roundup and calving. The house had been expanded and improved until it was one of the finest in the county, with glass windows, a proper kitchen with a modern stove, and even indoor plumbing Nathan had installed 3 years earlier. But for all their success, Nathan and Josephine never forgot where they had started. They remained generous with their neighbors, helping newcomers get established, extending credit when times were hard, sharing their prosperity in quiet ways. When Tommy turned 18, Nathan asked him what he wanted to do with his life. They were riding fence line together, just the two of them, checking for damage after a hard spring storm. I want to stay here, Tommy said without hesitation. I want to work the ranch with you, learn everything you can teach me. Eventually, when you are ready, I want to run it myself. But not instead of you, Papa, with you. Nathan felt his throat tighten with emotion. That is what I hoped you would say. This ranch is not just for me and your mother. It is for all of you. I want you to have it, to build on what we have started. I will make you proud. You already have, son, every day of your life. That fall, at a dance in the nearby town of Beaver Creek, Tommy met a young woman named Sarah Collins. She was the daughter of a homesteader who had settled in the area 2 years earlier, 17 years old with honey-colored hair and a laugh that seemed to brighten the whole room. Tommy was smitten immediately, and Sarah seemed equally taken with him. Josephine watched her son fall in love with a mixture of joy and recognition. She remembered that feeling, the way Nathan had made her feel seen and valued in a way no one else ever had. She saw the same thing happening between Tommy and Sarah, and she knew with a mother's intuition that this was something real and lasting. Tommy courted Sarah properly, riding over to the Collins place every Sunday after church, helping her father with heavy work and gradually winning the family's approval. By Christmas, he asked permission to marry her, and the wedding was planned for the following June. The wedding was held at the ranch, with nearly 100 people attending. Sarah was a beautiful bride in a dress that Josephine and Emily had sewn together, and Tommy could not stop smiling the entire day. They moved into a small house Nathan had built for them near the main house, close enough to be part of the family but far enough to have their own space. Within a year, Sarah was pregnant, and Josephine found herself preparing to become a grandmother at 40. The idea was strange and wonderful at the same time. Where had the time gone? It seemed like only yesterday she had been stepping off that stagecoach, terrified and alone, and now here she was with grown children and grandchildren on the way. Tommy and Sarah's son was born on a bright spring morning, a healthy boy they named Nathan Thomas Wright, after both his grandfather and father. When they placed little Nate in Josephine's arms for the first time, she cried, overwhelmed by the sense of continuity, of legacy. Look what we started, Nathan whispered to her as they admired their grandson together. One wrong turn and none of this would exist. It was not a wrong turn, Josephine said firmly. It was exactly the right turn, even if I did not know it at the time. Emily left for teaching college in Lincoln when she was 18, but she returned 2 years later with her certificate, and took over as head teacher at the Red Cloud School. She boarded with a family in town during the week, but came home every weekend. At 23, she married the new doctor who had set up practice in Red Cloud, a kind man named David Fletcher. They built a house in town but remained close to the family, visiting often. Samuel, true to his talent, opened a furniture workshop in Red Cloud when he was 20. His work became known throughout the region, and he had more commissions than he could handle. He married at 22, a quiet woman named Clara who helped him with the business side of his workshop. They had 3 children in quick succession, all boys, all as creative and active as their father. And Maggie, true to her childhood declaration, never left the ranch. She was Nathan's constant shadow, learning everything he could teach her about cattle and horses and land management. She was fearless and capable, able to do anything the hired hands could do and often better. When she was 19, she shocked everyone by announcing she had no intention of marrying. "I want to run this ranch with Tommy," she said firmly, when Josephine tried to gently suggest that she might want a family of her own someday. "I do not need a husband to have a meaningful life, Mama. You taught me that women can do anything men can do. I am happy as I am." Josephine could not argue with that logic, especially since it was true. She had taught her daughter to be independent and capable. If Maggie chose to use those skills to run the ranch rather than raise a family, who was Josephine to say that was wrong? Nathan, for his part, was delighted. "Always wanted a daughter who loved the land like I do," he said. "Maggie is worth any 3 hired hands." On their 20th anniversary, Josephine and Nathan took a trip, leaving the ranch in Tommy and Maggie's capable hands. They went to Omaha, staying in a proper hotel with electricity and modern conveniences. They attended the theater, ate in fancy restaurants, and walked city streets hand in hand like newlyweds. But after 3 days, they were both eager to go home. The city was interesting, but it was not theirs. Their hearts were on the prairie, with their family and their land. "I am glad we came," Josephine said on the train back, "but I am more glad to be going home." "I feel the same way. The city is fine for visiting, but it is not living, not the way we live." Nathan took her hand. "Did you find what you were looking for when you came west, Josephine?" "I know it was not what you expected, but was it what you needed?" She thought about the question seriously. "I think I found more than I was looking for. I was looking for opportunity, for a way to survive. What I found was a reason to live. I found you and our children and this land. I found myself, the person I was meant to be all along but did not know existed. So yes, I found what I needed, even though I did not know I needed it." The train rattled on through the darkness, carrying them home. By their 25th anniversary, Nathan was in his early 50s and Josephine was 48. They were both graying, both showing the wear of a life spent working hard under the prairie sun. But they were healthy and strong, and the ranch was more prosperous than ever. Tommy, now 32, had taken over most of the day-to-day operations, with Maggie as his second in command. They made an excellent team, and Nathan was able to step back and enjoy his grandchildren. He had 7 now, with another on the way, and he spoiled them all shamelessly. Josephine had taken up writing, recording the history of the ranch and the family for future generations. She wrote about coming west, about her first impressions of Nebraska, about falling in love with Nathan. She wrote about their struggles and triumphs, their children and grandchildren. She wanted the family to know their story, to understand how they had come to be. One evening, as she was writing by lamplight, Nathan came in from checking the stock and read over her shoulder. "You make it sound romantic," he said, amused. "It was romantic. It is romantic. We built something lasting, Nathan. That is romantic in the truest sense. He kissed the top of her head. "You are right, and I am grateful every day that Stagecoach brought you here." "To the wrong town," she said, smiling. "To exactly the right town," he corrected. "Just like I said all those years ago." They celebrated their 30th anniversary with a huge party at the ranch. All 4 children came with their families, filling the house with noise and laughter and love. Friends and neighbors from all over the county attended. There was music and dancing and more food than they could possibly eat. At one point, Josephine stood on the porch watching it all and felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to find an elderly man she did not immediately recognize. "Forgive me for bothering you," he said. "But I had to introduce myself. I am Henry Collins, Sarah's grandfather. I just wanted to thank you for welcoming my granddaughter into your family so warmly. She is very happy here. Sarah is a wonderful young woman. We are lucky to have her." Henry smiled. "You know, I heard the story of how you came to Red Cloud, how the stagecoach brought you to the wrong town." "Yes, that is true. I do not think it was the wrong town at all. I think God knew exactly what he was doing. Look at all this." He gestured at the celebration. "All these people, all this happiness, it all started because you ended up somewhere you did not plan to be." Josephine felt tears prick her eyes. "You are right. It was not the wrong town at all. It was exactly where I was meant to be." As the years continued to pass, Nathan and Josephine gradually transitioned from working the ranch to advising Tommy and Maggie, and finally, to simply enjoying their remaining years together. They took daily walks around the property, reminiscing about the early days when it had been just the 2 of them working to make something out of nothing. Nathan's health began to decline when he was 62. Nothing serious at first, just a slowing down, a need for more rest. But by 65, it was clear his heart was not as strong as it once had been. The doctor in Red Cloud, Emily's husband David, said there was nothing to be done except take it easy and enjoy whatever time remained. Nathan accepted this news with characteristic grace. "I have had a good life," he told Josephine. "Better than I ever expected. I have no regrets." "Do not talk like that. You have years left." "Maybe, maybe not. But either way, I need you to know that loving you has been the greatest privilege of my life. You made me better than I would have been alone." Josephine held his hand tightly. "We made each other better." Nathan lived 3 more years, long enough to see 2 more great-grandchildren born. He died peacefully in his sleep on a spring morning, with Josephine beside him, just as he had always wanted. He was 68 years old and had lived every year fully. The family gathered for the funeral, all of Nathan's children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. They buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch, where he could watch over the land he had loved so much. The whole county turned out to pay respects to a man who had been respected and loved by all who knew him. Josephine grieved deeply, but not bitterly. She had known Nathan for 40 years, been married to him for 38. They had built a life together, raised a family, created something lasting. She would miss him every day for the rest of her life, but she would never regret a moment of their time together. She continued to live on the ranch, cared for by her children but still independent. She spent her days with her grandchildren, tending a smaller garden and finishing the family history she had been writing. She wanted it completed while the memories were still fresh. 2 years after Nathan's death, Josephine was sitting on the porch when a stagecoach rattled past on the road. It was a rare sight these days, with the railroad having mostly replaced the stage lines. But watching it pass brought back a flood of memories. She remembered stepping off a similar coach 42 years earlier, dusty and scared and certain her life was over. She remembered the desolate town, her utter despair, and then Nathan's voice asking if she could sew and cook. She remembered falling in love with him slowly and then all at once. She remembered their wedding, the birth of their children, the thousand small moments that had made up their life together. She remembered his laugh, his hands, the way he had looked at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. Maggie found her there, tears streaming down her face, and sat beside her. "Missing Papa?" she asked gently. "Always. But I was also remembering the day I arrived here. I thought it was the worst day of my life. I thought everything had gone wrong. But your father, he knew better. He said maybe it was exactly where I belonged. He was right, he was." Josephine wiped her eyes. "You know, I spent my whole youth believing I was unlucky. My father was cruel, my mother died young, I had to work in a terrible factory. And then I got cheated by whoever sent me those false letters, ended up stranded in the middle of nowhere. It seemed like the final proof that life was unfair and I was destined to suffer. But it was not. No, it was the moment everything changed. If those letters had been real, if I had ended up in the right town with my cousin, I would have had a modest life. Safe, maybe, but small. Instead, I ended up here, and I got to live a life beyond anything I ever dreamed. I got your father and you and all your siblings. I got the ranch and the land and a purpose. I got love, real love, the kind that lasts a lifetime and beyond." Maggie leaned her head on Josephine's shoulder. "Papa used to say you were the best thing that ever happened to him. He was the best thing that ever happened to me. But it was more than just him. It was all of this, everything we built together. It was coming to a place where I belonged and not even knowing I belonged until I was already home." Josephine lived to be 73 years old, dying peacefully in her sleep surrounded by her children. She was buried beside Nathan on the hill overlooking the ranch, where they could rest together and watch over the land they had built. Her funeral was even larger than Nathan's had been. 4 children, 14 grandchildren, 23 great-grandchildren, and a great-great-grandchild on the way. Friends and neighbors from across Nebraska. The church in Red Cloud could not hold everyone, so they held the service outside under the endless prairie sky. Tommy, now 60 and looking more like his father every year, spoke at the service. "My mother used to tell us the story of how she came to Nebraska, how she thought she was going to one place and ended up in another, how she stepped off that stagecoach with 17 cents in her purse and no idea what to do. She would laugh and say it was the best mistake that ever happened to her. But it was not a mistake. She and my father proved that. Sometimes what looks like the wrong path is actually exactly where you are supposed to be. You just have to have the courage to see it through." After the funeral, the family gathered at the ranch house. It had been updated many times over the years, but still stood on the same foundation Nathan had built 70 years earlier. The land around it was still worked by his descendants, and it would continue to be worked by them for generations to come. In the house, carefully preserved in a glass case, were some of Josephine's belongings from that first day. Her worn carpetbag now empty. A letter from her supposed cousin, yellowed with age, and a simple blue dress, the first one Nathan had bought for her, carefully folded and saved. Above the case hung a hand-carved wooden sign that Samuel had made years earlier. It read simply, "The stagecoach brought her to the wrong town. The cowboy said, or maybe this is exactly where you belong." And hanging beside it was a photograph from Nathan and Josephine's 50th anniversary, which they had celebrated just weeks before Nathan's death. They stood together on the porch of the ranch house, both of them old and weathered but still strong. Nathan's arm was around Josephine's shoulders, and they were both smiling at something off camera, probably one of their grandchildren making faces to get their attention. They looked happy. They looked like they belonged together, belonged to the land and to each other. They looked like two people who had built something lasting out of an accident, a mistake, a wrong turn that had been right all along. The ranch continued on, passed from Tommy to his children and then to theirs. Red Cloud grew slowly, never becoming a large town but surviving when so many other prairie settlements failed. The school Emily had taught it remained open, educating generation after generation. Samuel's furniture workshop became a family business, passed down through his sons and their children. And on the hill overlooking the ranch, two simple headstones stood side by side. Nathan Wright, beloved husband, father, grandfather. Josephine Reed Wright, beloved wife, mother, grandmother. The dates marked lives that had spanned most of a century, that had seen Nebraska transform from wild frontier to settled farmland. But more than the dates, more than the names, what mattered was what they had built together. A family that stretched across generations. A ranch that had survived drought and depression, and the countless challenges of prairie life. A love story that proved sometimes the wrong turn leads to exactly the right place. Because on a September day in 1877, a stagecoach had brought a scared young woman to a dying town in the middle of nowhere. And a cowboy with kind eyes and a generous heart had looked at her and seen not a burden or a problem but a possibility. A future. A home. He had offered her a job, and she had accepted. And from that simple transaction, from that moment of desperate need meeting unexpected kindness, had grown something neither of them could have imagined. A love that lasted decades. A family that would carry their names and their values forward through time. A legacy that proved over and over again the truth of Nathan's simple words on that first day. Maybe this is exactly where you belong, and it had been. Oh, it had been.